You need a blanket too, just go right to sleep. I love it. It's good stuff. Well, welcome everybody. If we can bring it on in, we're going to pray and transition. Zeke's going up an L. I don't know why. Standing and bringing socks one. Well, you know what? I totally forgot to tell people about the socks last service, so you can take two for this one. Not that really helps for the last weeks. It's okay. Well, as we transition, welcome to those who are new. Who would like to pray us in? Anybody? You volunteer? You volunteer someone else, that means you're willing to do it. No. Anybody? Alright, I'll pray us in. Lord, I just thank you so much for this time together. Lord, where we can read your word. Lord, I thank you for all the youth here. Lord, for different schools, different families. Lord, that you brought them here together. And I pray that your message would be preached today, Lord, that you would speak, Lord, that you would touch our hearts, our minds, Lord, convict us, but also encourage us. And so may you speak through me today. Lord, just bless the reading of your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we are finishing our what we call souvenir series, where we kind of have a little token to give out every week. We're finishing that series, and this series has been called It Takes Two. So if you haven't been here for the last few weeks, we've been looking at two different characters in different stories. And we had those little dancing videos up there talking about the little picture of who those are. And today we're talking about Elijah and Elisha, these prophets. And so they have both had an impactful legacy. And today I want to talk about what that is. Now for legacies, when I think about you having a legacy, something that continues, I don't know what for you as high schoolers think about. For maybe the seniors in here, maybe you're thinking about that more. Like, okay, you have graduations and like you're leaving. What are people going to remember me for? What are they going to think about? Maybe for freshmen, sophomores, you're not thinking about that yet. But for this big transitions in life, you wonder what people remember about you. One way that that's encapsulated in high schools is yearbooks. I don't know if they do that here, but where I come from, in America at least, in our high school yearbooks, you usually get like a quote, and people try to make lasting legacies out of that. This guy right here, Amkid, he says, I'm not a vegetarian because I love animals. I'm a vegetarian because I hate plants. It's a good legacy, man. Good old Richard here says, cheaters never win, but I just graduated. Outing himself as a cheater right there at the very end. That's his legacy, I guess. Jordan says, don't follow your dreams, follow my Twitter. Which, I guess because of this meme, he's actually gotten a couple thousand followers. So, I mean, respect to Jordan, that's what he wanted, I guess. Morgan quoted, Morgan is my girlfriend. Nobody. She drags herself, saying, I'm single and all alone. Good old Hugh here, education is important, but big biceps are importanter. And then maybe this last one will resonate with some of us. High school was easy, it was like riding a bike. Except the bike was on fire, the ground was on fire, and everything was on fire because it was hell. Maybe some of you feel that way right now. Now why do I bring that up? I'm reminded of a high school yearbook quote, you could say. But me, I went to a private Christian school, and so what we did was we had Bible verses. What's the legacy verse we're going to put? So we put like our references in our yearbook. And one of my best buddies, I made like a really bad version of a yearbook photo right here. My buddy Jimmy, he chose a verse I'd never seen before. It was a very random verse. It was 2 Kings 2, verses 23 to 24. And he thought, this would be a funny verse to put. As like his legacy, somebody's going to look this up. And they're going to be like, well, why would he pick that verse? And it reads, from there Elisha went up to Bethel. As he was walking along the road, some boys came out of the town and cheered at him. Get out of here, Baldy. They said, get out of here, Baldy. He turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. And 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. That's what he wanted as his legacy verse. What a verse that is. This verse, it actually has quite a history. Some people who are not Christian, atheists, look to this and say, see, God's not good. He just mauled some boys. And there's actually a meme version of this verse where like 2 bears become like a Mecca and start like just lasering them. So these verses have captured people's attention. And I want to talk about them today. I'm reminded of Scott. He says that he hears this often. I dare you not to bore me with the Bible. I feel like a lot of youth, a lot of adults too, not just youth, think the Bible is boring. See, we just had some laughs about this verse, but maybe it's not to be laughed at. What can we actually learn from it and from the stories that surround it? And so I hope what we're going to find today is not boring. I hope as we dig deep into this verse, we go, there's actually a lot of things that maybe the Bible is saying that I didn't see there on first look. And I hope at the end of today we'll take away that an impactful legacy is a faithful one. But in order to get there, we need to turn in our Bible. So let's turn to 2 Kings chapter 2. So if you have a Bible, it's going to be on page 252. We're going to be turning there. If you don't know what 2 Kings is, it's the second. There's a first one. 1 Kings starts the book. It got divided because, honestly, the book was too long. That's kind of how it usually worked. They needed the books to fit in one scroll, and so they got divided. So it's the second part. And basically, 1st and 2nd Kings comes in the time of the kings. After David and Saul, the ones that we looked at earlier in the series, the kingdom started to go downhill. Things are starting to go bad, as you can imagine, with the kingdom. God did not necessarily desire them to have a king, but the people wanted a king. God gives them a king. And okay, the first king didn't do so great. Second king's doing better. Oh, then it starts to keep going downhill. The kingdom at this point is divided. And they're starting to be unfaithful to God. Some of the kings are going after other gods, worshiping Baal, worshiping other idols. People are not being faithful. And so what does God do? He sends prophets. He sends Elijah, who makes mighty acts calling people to repent and turn back to God. He sends Elisha to do the same, to continue what Elijah started. These prophets don't just tell the future, they convince people that they need to turn to God. So what we're going to look at today, chapter 2, is kind of the transition period. 2 Kings kind of starts when it's transitioning from that great prophet Elijah to another great prophet, Elisha. And so I want to kind of talk about really pretty much all of chapter 2, but we'll read parts and I'll summarize others for the sake of time. So I want to start in verses 1 to 3. So 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1 to 3. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, which if you've heard about Elijah, maybe that's one of the main stories you've heard, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "so be quiet." We'll take a break. I'll summarize the next. So the next scene is Elijah going up into heaven. This faithful man goes, God takes him directly up. He doesn't die. If you've heard much about Elijah, maybe this is a story you've heard. His robe falls down. Elisha picks it up, continuing this role of the prophet. Then Elisha goes to one city, and he's welcomed. This city named Jericho. They had a bad history, but now they're turning to God. They desire him. And then, he goes to this other city named Bethel, who he was just talking to, the one who he told to be quiet. And then we arrive at verse 23. So that's kind of just a summary up to verse 23. 23 says, from there, Elisha went up to Bethel. As he was walking along the road, some boys came out of the town and jeered at him. "Get out of here, Baldy," they said. "Get out of here, Baldy." He turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys, and he went on to Mount Carmel, and from there returned to Samaria. It's a weird passage for maybe some of us who've never heard it before. I remember when I was in high school and heard it for the first time when Jimmy showed it to me. I was like, what is going on there? My first question was he just annoyed? Like, was this guy just annoyed and he just, for some reason, can call down bears for judgment? Like, what is going on? This picture here comes from that same, an animation video. And I think it's not really a good picture. We'll get into that why. Why there's much more to this. And ultimately, the question that we want to find is, what does this passage say about God? Whenever we turn to the Bible, that can be an interpretation question for us. What can it say about God? Well, the first thing I want to point to, if you notice on the screen, when we look at verse 2 in chapter 2, it says that they went down to Bethel. Now, the question I want to pose is, did they go down or did they go up? See, the thing that has confounded scholars, some people just say, well, the Bible's wrong here. They must have just been there. Is it makes no sense to go down to Bethel. It makes no sense. It's not to the north. It's not to the south. It's also down in a ridge. You wouldn't go up the mountain. So it makes no sense to go down. Why would it say that? Well, there's a whole bunch of references in the Bible that talk about going up as a place of a way of worship. See, a lot of places to worship were on the mountains because it's seen that, they're higher to the heavens, higher to the gods. And so often a way of talking about worshiping was to go up. And so in many ways, this city Bethel, which had turned to idolatry, which was against God, I think the author there is really making an effort in verse 2 to say there is no chance that they're going there to worship. They're going there as God's prophets. I found a map here that kind of communicates this better. You can see, although the picture's not that great, that there's mountains in Bethel. So it's like you were to go up. And it'll say that later in verse 23 as he's on the way. So it makes no sense for him to go down. It's B if I say like, I'm going to go down to Mount Calhoun. It makes no sense. I would usually hike up it. I would also have to go north. It makes no sense to go down. And that also, but then your question is probably, well then why does it describe him as going up to Bethel in verse 23? Well, he's along the way. I found a picture of a road here. And so he's going from going to Jericho, then he's going up to Bethel, and he's on his way to Mount Carmel. So he's actually on the way to an actual mountain. But I think the significance of all of that I bring up because when this text says, get out of here, Baldy, in the original language, again, the Bible is not written in English, it's written this book in Hebrew, it actually just says, go up. Like what they're saying to Elisha is, go up, bald-headed one, basically, if we're going to be super literal. Go up, bald-headed one. And so they're telling him, go up. And so one way that we can interpret this, there's several. So one is, he's just saying, get out of here. Second is go up. Some people argue, they're saying go up like Elijah, like drop dead, like disappeared. Or they're telling him, go and worship. Here, we're in Bethel, you should worship our gods. Something about worship. Now, I'm going to connect some other pieces that maybe add some background why I think that is maybe the most helpful for us. One of that is the other part of their jeer. So they're saying, get out of here. They're saying, go up, baldy. Go up, bald-headed one. If you notice in that picture with Elijah going up into heaven, he has some balls. And one thing that's significant about being bald, I have nothing against bald-headed people. I love Jeff, who used to be the high school guy. He's bald. But in this time period, being bald was kind of seen as you lacked power. You didn't have much authority. And so it makes even more of a contrast that, wouldn't you know it, look on this page, the other page, in chapter 1, verse 8, it says, and this is describing Elijah, he had a garment of hair and had a leather belt around his waist. If you look at that, no. Or he was a hairy man. Elijah was associated with hairiness, and Elisha, they're calling bald. There's this contrast here that they're saying, you know that guy who was before you, he's hairy, he has authority, you're nothing like him. You don't have any authority like Elijah before you. And so when they say, go up, bald-headed one, they're challenging his authority. Saying you are not of God. You are not Elijah's successor. They're challenging him. But who even are these people? Because it says some boys. Is that like preteeners? Is that high schoolers here? What age are they? And I think part of that is conflicted because old translations used to say like little children here. So we get this idea that these bears are coming killing these little children. But again, that significance that they're challenging his authority. Who might do that? Well, in 1 Kings chapter 12, it uses the same term here for the boys. But it's using it about these advisors to the king. There's this king named Rehoboam. And he's listening to some older gents who are giving him some advice. And then he's like, ooh, but I like what my younger friends are saying. It's the same term being used here, but they weren't just children. They were young, unmarried males, one. So they're probably not that young. But they also have a specific role. They're royal. They're priestly. They're supposed to be giving advice. And so when we see these boys, these young men coming here, and then they're telling Elisha, go up, bald-headed, it brings together who they are, I think, to show just how much they're challenging him. But it's not just about challenging Elisha. It's not. See, I don't think Elisha is taking this just necessarily personally. It's challenging against God. That if this place that they're coming from is against God, everything that they're doing here is not just jeering at Elisha. No, it's at God. Rejecting who God has sent, what God's purposes are. And then Elisha calls down a curse. Which I think we need to understand that a curse here, it's not like Harry Potter. Like, it's not like Elisha takes his staff and is like, bear Maulus, and like it expects like the balls to come out and maul them. Like when he placed a curse on them, it is washing his hands, it is up to God. God is the one who's going to decide their fate. It is, God, you do what you will to them, that they have rebelled against you. They are not turning to you. He is calling God to act. And what does God do? Well, God does bring these bears. But why 42? Why 42? There is significance in this number, culturally, but which is kind of weird. It's a random number, right? But if you search in Google, there's actually an Easter egg. If you didn't know this about Google, there's different Easter eggs. If you search, it'll give you some answers. If you search in Google the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything, it will tell you 42. Yes, Annalise. It's from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a movie. It's from a movie. It's a reference, Josh. It's not like actual. But there's significance to this number culturally. That when I said that quote, that number, Jolene automatically knew, oh, that's from a movie, right? In that movie, they are basically told, come back millions of years and you'll find out the answer to the universe. And this supercomputer computes, and everyone's excited, and it just says 42. There's cultural significance to that number. There's significance to that number also in 2 Kings. See, if you were to turn over a few pages to 2 Kings chapter 10, there's this scene where this King Jehu, in the house of Ahab, that Jehu, guess what? As Lord's judgment, kills 42 people. Those who had rebelled against God, those who are of this house of Ahab, who are worshiping this other god. This is a picture of a model of Baal. That God's judgment was against them for worshiping this other god. There's significance, cultural significance to 42. It communicated divine intention, that this was from God, not just random. So when God sends these bears, that's a confirmation of it is Him at work, not Elisha, no one else. And so as we look at this passage, and all right, I hope I haven't bored you. That challenge of me, maybe not to bore God. There's so much complexity, different layers here, that this just simple, weird, memey animation doesn't suffice. We really can't just picture it, maybe. Maybe our imagination doesn't really have a reference because we're not from that culture. But what does this passage have to say about God? What does it have to say about God? Well, one of the key things I think it can teach us is that judgment is the Lord's. Too often we want to be the judge. Oh, I know it's right. I know it's wrong. Oh, they really wronged me. And we want to take revenge. I'm just so angry. I want to take them out. I'm reminded of that. I did some fitness races last weekend. And I was doing one with a buddy of mine. His name's Josh. And we're running around the track. And this guy who's actually ended up taking first place, which makes it even worse, comes and shoves him out of the way because he was in like the slow lane. Like my friend Josh was in the slow lane where he was supposed to be. So the guy just pushes him. And I'm like, oh, I'm watching. I'm like waiting for him to come back around. Like I played football, American football. I'm like, take that guy down when he comes. Like I wanted revenge. I wanted vengeance for what he just did to my friend. I feel like that is a natural, sinful instinct. There is a righteousness instinct in wanting justice, but it's sinful when we think we are the ones who get to enact that justice. The judgment is the Lord's. And so I bring that up because for many of us in this room, we want justice. But do we want vengeance too? Do we want to take things into our own hands? We see here with Elisha trusts God so much says, I'm going to leave it to the Lord. The curse is in His name. I'm not going to do anything. But then the Lord does show up. And if it seems like, oh, this is just too foreign from God, we want to look in the New Testament as well. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus said something similar when He sends His disciples out. He sends His disciples out and tells them, to be welcomed into people's home. But if they don't welcome Him, just dust off your sandals at the foot of the door. That is a sign of God's judgment. That if they don't turn to Him, God will still judge them. In Romans chapter 12, verse 19, it talks about vengeance being the Lord's, instead overcoming evil with good. That what we can do is be good. That we can love. That we ultimately leave that vengeance, leave that justice to the Lord. And one of my favorite things about Matthew 10 is that it says something 3 times. In those 6 verses, it says, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. I feel like a lot of times our desire for vengeance, for revenge, for just wanting to take things into our own hands comes from a fear. You know, maybe it's a fear of vulnerability, a fear of inadequacy, fear of insecurities. I was talking to a student this morning about their insecurities that they have. You know, sometimes we want to just take action. It can come from a place of fear. But ultimately, what I think we can see in the lives of Elijah and Elisha, they faced so many things. They faced people, other different prophets, other kings. They faced so many different people, faced so many different dangers, but they also never had fear because they could trust God. And God would always be the one to go with them. And so my question for us out of this right now is, what do you need to leave to God? You know, what type of bitterness in your heart? What type of just desire for it? Maybe what type of feeling like you know what is right do you need to leave to God? See, I think in this passage we can see three different responses in the whole chapter. We didn't look too close at Jericho, but three different responses. I kind of put them all up in S. One is to scoff at God. Like those young men who scoff at God, like, oh, this prophet has no place here, no authority, scoff. Or we can seek God. I'd love for you to go back and maybe read it more in depth, but in that middle part of chapter 2, Jericho is like, oh, God, we need you, Elisha, please help us. Seek God. And to serve God, as Elijah and Elisha did. And so kind of the way our lives will look, the legacy we'll leave behind depends on our responses to God. And so what type of legacies will we leave behind? Now, as you move to a different school, maybe some of you in this next year, you're going to move to a new country. Maybe some of you are graduating. Maybe you don't even have any type of transition. Maybe it's just the legacy you have in your family or with your siblings, your friends. What type of legacy will you leave behind? And I believe, based on the story of Elijah and Elisha, an impactful one that's going to be remembered for generations is a faithful one. We have a summer camp coming up in August, and we as a staff went to Macau this week, and we went to the ruins, and I love to read and learn about martyrs, people who died for the faith. And it has a whole list there of like Japanese and Vietnamese martyrs, and I love reading those, taking the time to sit with that. That those names are people like me who lived and died for the faith. And their legacy might not be as big as Elijah and Elisha's names, but it's remembered by the Lord, and it made an impact in ways that we really can't see. And so maybe even if your legacy isn't really big, gaining followers, gaining people who know about you, an impactful legacy is ultimately a faithful one. And so, what will yours be? I don't know. I don't know what my legacy will be. It might be different for different people in this room. But if we are faithful to God, it will make an impact. And ultimately, a faithful impact is one that points to the gospel truths, which we kind of say every week. Jesus has died for us, paid for our sins, that he has taken those punishments on himself, taken the curse ultimately on himself. He is risen as the one who is divine, and he'll come again. We have no fear. We don't have to fear death. We can have new life in him. Let us pray. Lord, I thank you so much for this time together. Lord, that we get to just read your word, Lord, dig down deep into it. Lord, I thank you that you have preserved your word throughout history, Lord, so that your people can have it. Lord, that your spirit would speak through it. And so, Lord, I just pray that your word, Lord, would continue. Lord, as we go out of this place, Lord, that we would be encouraged but also convicted. Lord, that we would be your people in this world. But Lord, ultimately, as the world also comes against us, Lord, we would not take vengeance in our own hands, Lord, but that we would just love, overcome evil with good, Lord. Lord, that we would leave it all to you. Lord, leave bitterness, unforgiveness behind, and ultimately be like you. And so may our lives reflect these gospel truths, and Lord, may your kingdom come and your will be done. Amen. And all God's people said together, Jesus has died, Jesus is risen, Jesus will come again. Amen. Go in peace. Grab some socks on the way out, so I didn't forget first service. My bad. I got some yellow socks there.